Hello, everyone. I'm Tani. I'm an associate director at KPMG based in Auckland. Like Ian said, I lead up the enterprise risk team here, supporting David Sutton, who's a partner. I've been doing this for 6 years for this firm, but I've got a 13 years wider experience. I look a lot younger, David, but I'm not. So like David and I kind of tease about it, is like I'm the younger risk professional in the team, and he's more experienced one. So yeah, doing this work for the last 13 years as a risk professional, but also in terms of the internal audit and compliance space as well. So been across different organizations, financial sector, oil and gas, which has a completely different risk profile, retail business as well, and government organizations. So yes, I've seen different enterprise risk management framework, and obviously the conversation from risk appetite to how do you really get to operationalizing that in the business. But then how do you do all of that in terms of doing, when you have except for the financial sector, which has got like hundreds of risk professionals, how do you do that when you've got a team of 4? And that's largely the case in a lot of New Zealand-based organizations as well. So, today what we'll be covering is how do we really get those governance, risk, and compliance tools that has been getting a lot of attention these days in terms of how do we automate some of that tactical work that the risk professionals have been doing, which is more in terms of communicating with different parts of the business, trying to get the information, and they're always running across the clock to get the risk reporting done on time for the quarter. Right? That's always the thing that we are worried about, is how do we get the right information, the right timing, and then running after those reminder emails to say, hey, have you done the control testing? Can we get the results? What is it looking like? Rather than having our focus in terms of what's the risk landscape? How is it that changed? Are there any external factors that we should be looking out for rather than that reactive nature in terms of what incident has happened and trying to react to it rather than being a bit more proactive in terms of what's changed or what is likely to change in the next quarter and planning for it. So how do we then kind of, get the tool support that can do all that reminder emails and live update of, getting the right reports in terms of your risk trends, and then just focusing on conversation and on the insights piece of it. And that's kind of where we are going to talk about today. So one is, I thought we'll probably start with the risk professionals. So I know we have all been, faced some of those common challenges as well during our time as risk teams as well, and then kind of work out why that kind of need for the GRC tools. What are the key drivers that we should be looking out for, and what are some of those common things that we kind of have seen in terms of where people go wrong in terms of the GRC implementation. And so what do we need to be more careful about? So I know there are just a few, and I'm sure we would have a lot bigger list if we sat down and kind of list those down in terms of the common challenges. Starting with the manual processes, and I think that is something that we all can relate to, is a lot of organizations have got those manual processes in place, which are inconsistently followed right across and are definitely inefficient as well in many ways as a result. And then in terms of moving on to people, where there's a lack of clarity about who needs to do what. And there's always a tension in terms of, oh, I thought that the other person was looking after this one, and I was not sure if it should be me. There's always a lack of clarity in there. Moving on to in terms of the service delivery, and because of the lack of clarity, it rolls into the other set, which is getting an effective 3 lines of defense framework, because the line between, what's line 1 risk needs to do and the line 2 needs to do has, to a certain extent, been a bit blurry as well. So how do we get a consistent approach in that kind of service delivery model? And that includes, in our, how do we operate as a business as well? And how do you kind of embed risk management into that process and get that right? And then technology as just being one of the enablers, not the focus of the GRC solution as well. Because another problem that we have been facing is everything has been done across 10 different spreadsheets when it comes to risk registers, right? And those are not live, so that information might be like 3 months old, and we are still trying to get that up to date. And there are obviously legacy systems that have been in place for the last, 25 plus years, and cannot no longer be supported as well. So, and that kind of leads us to the next part, which is how do we then get a big picture view for the organization in terms of, that enterprise view of risk. And if we haven't got that, it kind of leads into the poor governance part, which is how do we then challenge people in terms of where do they actually need to focus upon? So a lot of those questions kind of suggested that, GRC solutions could be a good point to start with in terms of automating the tactical part of risk management and getting us thinking in terms of the actual and focus on the right insights as well that matter. And also in terms of saying these are the right questions that the board and the management should be asking their teams as well in terms of what are those key drivers, how are we doing managing our risk against the appetite? What is it that we need to do? And it's not getting controls and directing your, prioritization of the resources in the right part of the organization and to manage the right risk as well. So, and that kind of helped because we wanted to get risk to be a bit more future focused, a bit more futuristic view, rather than a reaction in terms of what's already happened. The two biggest one were the problem or challenges that people face when kind of selecting their or implementing their GRC solution is heavy focus on tech. They're so focused on what technology are they selecting that they miss out the bigger picture in terms of have we actually got the right process from a risk framework and a management perspective to support and make sure that the technology that they select would actually work and deliver the value. That's the biggest one. And clear vision and structure for future. Is that going to support my vision for the organization for the next 10 years? Or is it just something that the process that I've got at the moment, and I'm just going to put that into the system because that's not really going to work in the long term. You haven't planned your business, your growth vision for the organization. If you're going for functional process changes, and that's not considered quite well, if your control environment and your vision to uplift that control environment and risk management environment hasn't been considered, it's going to be a lot problematic. If you haven't considered about, what is that bigger enterprise framework that you want to embed, and, because currently the business has been working in silos. If you put everything into the system, it's not going to be helpful. So making sure that you have got the right structure is probably something where a lot of organizations miss the point. They are very technology focused in terms of what do we select. And most of the GRC technologies, to be honest, have got quite similar functionalities. So that's really not the question. It's more about, do you have the right target operating model to actually get that to add and bring the value that you need? So I think the key drivers, and like I already said, is more in terms of understanding how big and complex is your organization. If you're someone like a smaller one, you don't need like a Ferrari. You could sometimes do with a Subaru as well. Nothing against Subaru, guys. Nothing against Subaru. It's just that saying that, it's in every case, you don't need to a high-end GRC solution. You need to find something that really fits your requirements. The other one we kind of say is solution implementation and licensing. And you ask any organization, what GRC requirements do you have? And most of them, like 90% of them, will give you this laundry list in terms of my dream, in terms of what everything the system should do. And the thing that we do recommend a lot of our clients is take a Moscow approach, which is your must have, should have, could have, and won't have. So you can still live with it. you don't need everything. So really identifying in terms of which buckets those requirements fit, and in terms of, what are the different solutions and functionalities that would really work. That will really work for your organization. And like I said, the other one was maturity of your risk management framework and processes. So that's where in terms of how mature are you, like I said already, if you don't have the right structure, the right target operating model, making your GRC solution effective is not going to work. Technology architecture of the organization. If you have 10 different technology solutions that are in place, and you want to add like the 11th one, maintaining all of that is going to be a big trouble, a big one. So making sure if you are using a lot of ServiceNow functionalities or platforms, adding a ServiceNow would be a more meaningful solution rather than going for something else in-house or trying to develop like an ad hoc solution as well. The other thing is a lot of organizations kind of reach a point where they go like, oh, we have got a health and safety solution. And that kind of also, capture risk and controls. And so we are going to go with that and continue using it. But it doesn't really fit in your long-term goals and vision as well. So that's where in terms of, future scalability of growth and vision is also important in terms of, so tomorrow, if you want to use the GRC solution to manage your obligations, to manage your controls in relation to those obligations, or maybe for, say, model risk management, is that solution fit enough? Would it be able to scale and adjust to those of some of your requirements is going to be a big question as well. And the extent of ongoing support, because there are solutions out there that can provide an ongoing managed service. So you get in terms of, your obligations list being supported, and then support with in terms of how that's evolving rather than going in one-time implementation as well. So different things to kind of think about before you kind of decide, what is the right GRC solution for your organization.
Tani, just, I don't know if it's a question for the room, but I also think that, you see organizations spending millions on their ERPs and SAP and what have you. And then when we're trying to get a GRC, we're like, 10 grand, 20 grand. It always seems to be like we've got to really scump, and it does feel, particularly if we're going towards a digital future with data, I think we have to kind of up our thinking around actually, if you're going to spend millions on an ERP, to not spend more than 100,000 on a risk system seems a bit strange.
At the same point, David, I'd probably say that not every GRC system, there's a myth that every GRC system implementation is going to cost me $2 million.
Yeah.
That's really not the case. And that's where the costing becomes important, because there are solutions out there that are probably in the range of like, maybe I would say 50K. And that are super out of the box solutions as well, which are really easy to implement. So they may kind of result into integration problem with your wider technology environment, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to be an effective GRC solution. So it can still meet your requirement, probably can be scaled to include other modules as well. So if you kind of plan to implement your internal audit module as well, just kind of, get all your findings in one place, or from an obligation management perspective for a better compliance management, you can still kind of use those ones, and they are out of the box. So, you have still got one source of truth for everything. It's a live system kind of that generates all that view for you. And so different considerations that definitely need to be taken into consideration, but it's not something that costing is just one part of it. So trying to understand what functionalities you need would be very important.
So you're saying don't be cheap, but we don't have to bet the farm with it.
Kind of, yeah. You don't need a Ferrari. Sometimes you do, but not all the time. So what's really the approach that you should probably take is starting with your functional processes. So making sure that you've got the bigger picture view of your organization in terms of how it operates. And linking into that is mapping of your people, roles, and responsibilities in terms of who's going to be doing what as part of those functional processes as well. And then moving into terms of how does that take into consideration your business operating model for service delivery, and technology being only the enabler and not the key focus. So it's important, but that's not the most important part of it. It's making sure that you've got that right target operating model that kind of generates the insights in terms of, what are the key indicators that you should be targeting, and also supports an effective governance kind of structure as well. So are you really able to provide the management a live view in terms of, what are the key areas that they should be focusing on? And then the conversation directly goes towards, what's driving some of those insights and what are the things that they should be challenging the management on. So once that's done, the key learnings, and I kind of have done GRC implementation, started the process 10 years back in India. We did the SAP implementation, and that was painful. One of our very early stages, it took a 5-year program to kind of get to the delivery. And I think the key learning was the vision wasn't clear. So people came going back and forth in terms of what this requirement are, that they kind of needed to focus. They kind of took that technology implementation approach. And that's why I said, it's not just the technology, it's really looking a lot more wider than that. Being bold and agile, I think implementing a GRC solution is a good way to kind of being bold in terms of your vision. Using this as an approach or as a tool to plan what your 10-year organization would look like. So really use this time as a good place for transformation journey as well, rather than just saying, I'll just add on my technology solution and move my risk registers onto the system. It's a lot more than that. Set your team up for success. I think change management and communication and making sure your people are prepared for that change is equally important, because if you don't have a good change management process, getting people really to get the buy-in for using GRC is a big problem. I was seconded to an organization for 18 months. They had a full-on GRC system implemented. Unfortunately, no one was using it because they kind of struggle in terms of the functionality, which basically meant the organization had spent millions because that was a global organization, and yet it was ineffective. So making sure your team is actually supported is going to be a big part of making your GRC solution effective. Next one is the value add. And the value add here is you're taking a lot of that reminder emails out. It's a system that's bugging the people, not you. So, rather than risk professionals are, well, we should be liked, right, by the organizations. It's not that we like to bother people. So I think it's making everyone's life a lot more easier, a lot more value add for the management because it's real time. So you can actually just log onto the GRC dashboards, see what the trend's looking like, and probably generate a report. So if anything was meant to happen, like a cyber event maybe is in the news, and if you are the head of risk in your organization and you get called by maybe the ARC chair on your way, and if there's a trouble in terms of, if there's a cyber event in the news, what does it mean for our organization? And for you in that case, rather than having to call up 10 different teams or the head of cybersecurity, all you need to do is log on to the system, get the dashboard out to really understand what does it mean from a controls perspective for your organization. How effective are your cybersecurity controls? What kind of cybersecurity events have happened in the past? And what do your indicators kind of suggest in terms of the trends as well? So rather than spending an entire week, you have something that can be pulled out into a report. You can put in your comments, and that is ready to go to the ARC chair in terms of, here's what it means for our organization, rather than having to wait that long. And then designing with the future in mind, I think that's really critical, because if you have got a GRC solution that cannot expand beyond a certain limit, and you've got something that only maps your processes, risks and controls within your process, it's really not going to work for future. So making sure you have a futuristic view in mind is going to be super critical while selecting your GRC solution. And where to from here? So where to from here? In terms of, is this the end game? Probably not. It's just the beginning, because what's happening is your risk landscape is evolving, yes, but so is the external environment. And especially with something like ChatGPT, there's a huge focus on AI. So, this is probably just the beginning of your risk transformation. The next step is, how do you bring in AI to kind of add more value to this? So that would mean that you will have more natural language processing tools that can easily integrate your GRC solution and give you a very update in terms of what's your control environment looking like and where you need to focus. So that's where your drive for future in terms of bringing in more tools and automation is where your risk transformation is heading. So really very critical at this point in time in terms of making sure you get the right system, but that also supports in terms of the growth and the insights that are coming through. Any questions?
I guess there's a reality that most of us would love a GRC solution. We don't get enough funding all the time. But to the point, this is sort of saying you've got the go ahead to do it, and then you choose it. So if you were to focus on your business case, would you take some of your key learnings and put them back into a business case for implementation? Or what are the key things you'd put in your business case?
I think the key thing would be in terms of the value that it's going to drive is going to be super critical. Making sure, and when you say value, it's going to be your target operating model for the entire business, not just the risk function. Because I think what we underestimate is the value that it brings for the business as well, rather than just being focused on, the risk function is trying to automate what they do. It's a lot beyond that. And I think the biggest value add is for the executive team, because the most important part of GRC solution is the good governance and oversight, because that's where a lot of, if you look at the regulator reports that have been sent through, it's always the governance that gets questioned. Not having the real time in terms of asking management the right questions, or business the right questions as well. So that's where the value add is, because it's real time. You don't have to wait for the information to be refreshed.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Towards the end, you talked about AI and how AI is enhancing, or should be able to enhance what we see in our GRC solution. So, hi, I'm Geeta. I'm from ASB, and most banks these days have good GRC solutions and very customized to their requirements. I've worked for a couple of banks. And like now we're looking at AI policies and how do we implement that, like through our model frameworks, etc. But what I'm interested in knowing from perhaps your experience is how is AI actually being integrated, or in your experience, what do you know about AI integration with GRC, and how palatable is it for the industry at the moment?
I think that's where the financial sector is definitely heading, is what we are hearing at the moment as well, because they have reached a point where they've got their own GRC tools. But that integration with, at the moment, there are natural language processing tools out there. that can actually easily draw the information that you can get from your GRC solution and provide you a live view in terms of your control environment. So how many duplicate controls exist? How accurate is your risk to control mapping? What is the quality of your control descriptions? And what's the extent to which part of those can be automated? So it's out there, and that's why I said GRC is just the start. There's a lot more that you can do from there on as well, and it's just going to evolve over the next 5-10 years.
I think from a generative AI point of view, everyone's talking about it. I haven't seen too much implementation yet. People are still thinking about it, but I think you have to get on the curve. If you aren't thinking about it, if you aren't maybe toying around with even just getting insights on emerging risks from ChatGPT and mucking around with it, I think you'll be behind the game in the longer term. But I think those natural language processing was before ChatGPT than generative AI. I think you do see with ASB where it's got hundreds, perhaps thousands of controls. It'd be really interesting just to even let it explore those while managing the risks, obviously, around not having that data available to the public in an open ChatGPT environment. But what insights would it bring that we don't get view of because we're operating in our divisions and we can't wade through 1,000 controls in milliseconds and say, actually, you've got X number of duplicated, heavier weighting to manual controls. You've got X number which are poorly worded through to there's an overweighting in certain divisions or poorer quality of controls. So I think there's going to be some huge opportunities while we support our business to manage the risks around AI. But I think the biggest risk is not doing something on it. And I think at some conference it was like ChatGPT won't take your job, but the person who can use it well. So I think we do have to be experimenting with it for sure.
Any more questions for Tammy? No? Okay, look, I think a couple of things there again resonate for me, Tammy. I'm certainly on that journey. And I don't know if you're talking about my system. I inherited a health and safety solution and morphed it to risk management. I had no choice. So we've done a lot of good work, but we're also on another journey to look at something else. So some of those things really resonated. I guess there's the utopia of sort of dynamic risk management and dashboards changing as you look at them. I think one of the challenges and whether AI fixes some of this and makes it easier is that a lot of organisations haven't really addressed their data challenges up front. So it's only going to be as good as what you can put in. And so what we're saying now is we've got a bit of a data management strategy to understand that more effectively. So I think that's the piece there. And very much to David's point that, organisations spend a lot of money on other things, whether it's customer relationship systems, etc. But we tend to skip and save. And I think I was in a room the other day where I was even told I could go back to managing risks off a spreadsheet, which made me slightly irate. Thank you for those insights. Everyone, please put your hands together.